It was supposed to be another quiet weekend at my lake cabin, the kind of place where the world slowed down and all I could hear was the lapping of the water against the dock and the calls of birds in the morning. I'd worked hard to buy that cabin, a little escape tucked just far enough away from town where no one could bother me. At least, that's what I thought until I opened my mailbox one Saturday morning and pulled out an envelope that looked far too official for comfort. Inside was a letter from the local homeowners association, written in bold language accusing me of non-compliance with community standards. The letter went on to state that my cabin's exterior didn't meet their approved color scheme. My dock was unauthorized, and even my small fishing boat tied up to the pier was a violation. They demanded immediate corrections and threatened daily fines if I didn't comply. At first, I laughed. It had to be a mistake. My property wasn't part of their neighborhood, and I'd never signed anything agreeing to HOA rules. But the more I read, the angrier I became. Not only were they trying to regulate a property outside their authority, but they were also attaching fines as if they were the law. By the end of the letter, they even hinted that continued violations may result in removal of non-conforming items, which I took to mean they thought they could tow my boat or even mess with my dock. The next day, I got my answer as to whether this was just some clerical mix-up. A knock sounded on my cabin door, and standing there was the HOA president herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a clipboard clutched under her arm. She introduced herself briskly and immediately began listing the supposed violations on my property. I cut her off and explained as politely as I could that my cabin was on private land, not subject to HOA jurisdiction. She gave me a thin smile and said, "All lakeside properties fall under our authority. If you live here, you follow our rules." I felt my blood pressure spike. Her tone wasn't one of negotiation but of entitlement, as if she owned my cabin. When I tried to hand her proof of ownership, she waved it away and warned me that ignoring their letters would only make things worse. Watching her march back to her SUV, I had no idea this was only the beginning of a fight that would spiral far beyond petty fines and into a battle over who truly owned the land under our feet. The letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. Within 2 weeks, I had a small stack of envelopes from the HOA, all demanding payment for fines that now totaled several $1,000s. They accused me of ignoring their orders, of creating an eyesore, and of endangering the so-called community standard. I had ignored the first notice, thinking the situation would resolve itself once they realized their mistake, but instead, the HOA doubled down. They weren't just posturing. They genuinely believed they had power over me. On a warm afternoon, while I was fixing a loose board on my dock, I heard tires crunching up the gravel road. A black SUV rolled up, followed by a pickup truck. Out stepped the HOA president, flanked by 2 board members and a pair of burly men who looked more like bouncers than security. She marched right up to me, clipboard in hand, and announced that I was now in serious violation of HOA rules and that my refusal to pay had left them with no choice but to escalate. I set down my hammer and told her once again that my property wasn't part of their subdivision and that they were harassing me without cause. Her face flushed red, and she raised her voice so everyone could hear. "This cabin is under our authority, whether you like it or not. You can't just ignore the law." The men behind her crossed their arms, clearly there to intimidate me. When I refused to back down, she whipped out her phone and right there in front of me, dialed 911, loud enough for everyone to hear. She told the dispatcher that a trespasser was refusing to leave HOA property. I couldn't believe my ears. Not only were they wrong, they were now trying to weaponize the police against me. It didn't take long for the patrol car to arrive, sirens off but lights flashing. The officer stepped out, hand resting near his holster, and asked me for identification. I calmly explained that I owned the property and handed over my deed and ID. The HOA president tried to interrupt, waving her arms and insisting that I was lying. But the officer held up a hand for her to be quiet. He looked through my paperwork carefully, his brow furrowing. Something wasn't adding up, and I could see the doubt settling on his face as he glanced between me and the furious HOA board. It was the first crack in their story, and I knew the truth was about to surface. The officer asked everyone to step back while he examined the documents. I handed him the folder I kept in my cabin's desk drawer, containing not only the deed to the cabin but also the paperwork from a land purchase I'd made years earlier. Back then, the parcel had been listed as abandoned community land by the county scrubland with an old, disused building on it. I'd bought it at auction for next to nothing, never thinking much of it. The officer skimmed through the documents, his expression shifting as he realized the implications. When I pointed out the parcel number, he radioed dispatch to confirm. The HOA president kept trying to talk over me, her voice rising in pitch with each interruption. "This is nonsense. He's a squatter. That land belongs to the HOA." She snapped, but the officer wasn't listening to her anymore. He was listening to dispatch. After a long pause, his radio crackled back with confirmation. The property where the HOA clubhouse, pool, and offices currently stood wasn't registered to the HOA at all. It was registered to me. The silence that followed was almost comical. The president's jaw dropped, and one of the board members muttered something under his breath, suddenly paling as the reality sank in. I explained calmly that the HOA must have assumed they owned the land, but they had never updated their records or paid attention to the county sales. For years, they'd been operating their clubhouse and amenities on land that legally belonged to me. The officer turned to the HOA president with a firm look. "Ma'am, if what I'm seeing here is correct, you filed a false report. This gentleman isn't trespassing, he's on his own property. In fact, you may be the ones trespassing." Her face flushed crimson, and she stammered, trying to regain her authority. But it was clear she'd lost control of the situation. I didn't raise my voice or gloat. I simply laid out the facts. "You've been fining me for a property you don't control. And worse, your entire association is built on land I own." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The officer gave me back my documents and told the HOA to leave immediately. Watching them retreat, their arrogance broken, I knew I finally had the upper hand. What had started as harassment was now a situation where I held all the cards. And they had no idea how badly this was about to end for them. Spent the next few days thinking about how I wanted to handle the situation. On one hand, I could have pressed charges right away for harassment, false reporting, and even trespassing. The police officer had made it clear that I had every legal right to do so. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that simple punishment wouldn't sting enough. The HOA had built their entire identity around controlling residents, dictating rules, handing out fines like candy. Taking that away from them would be far more devastating than a single legal case. So instead of running to court immediately, I contacted a lawyer and had a cease and desist drafted. Within a week, the HOA received an official notice. They were to vacate my land immediately and were banned from using any facilities built on it without my written consent. That meant their beloved clubhouse, their swimming pool, their tennis courts, and even the parking lot they held meetings in were now off limits. The reaction was swift and chaotic. Homeowners, who had been faithfully paying their dues for years, suddenly found out that the money they poured into maintaining those amenities had essentially been funding improvements on property they didn't own. They were furious not at me, but at the HOA board for their negligence. I watched as residents marched to the clubhouse, demanding answers, only to find locked doors and a notice posted by my lawyer. declaring the property closed due to trespassing. The HOA president tried to rally support, sending out angry emails claiming I was stealing from the community. But when residents dug into the public records, they saw the truth for themselves. The land had been in my name for years, fair and square. Any illusion of her authority crumbled overnight. Meanwhile, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee as peace finally returned to my cabin. No more fines, no more threats, no more self-important clipboard visits. I had turned their arrogance back on them, and in doing so, I gave the entire neighborhood freedom from their overreaching rule. In the end, I didn't just protect my cabin, I dismantled the very system that had tried to bully me. And as far as the HOA was concerned, they were banned permanently from the land they once believed was theirs. For the first time in years, the lake was truly quiet, and it belonged to them.